Welcome to this WIOA Title IB Services Matrix follow-up session. This is a follow-up session from last Wednesday, May 3rd, I believe, or maybe it was May 2nd, May 3rd, last Wednesday's Workforce Wednesday webinar. So this is a follow-up session to that. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Kirsten Bayer, and I'm with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. I'm the Digital Communications Manager, so feel free to reach out to me via email or via the chat and Q&A function on the webinar today, and I'm happy to support you with any technical difficulties or anything regarding the session follow-up. Go to the next slide for me. Thank you. A couple of housekeeping things today is that this session is being recorded. It will be up on our Illinois Workforce Academy website as well as Illinois WorkNet. So we're treating this, it will go on our WIOA Professional Development website page. I'll put that URL in the chat momentarily. I will also put the slides in the chat momentarily as well if you would like to download those now for your convenience. We also have closed captioning on today for accessibility reasons. Feel free to turn that on. And again, we are recording today's session. Please allow 48 working business hours. And actually this week, I'm going to ask that we allow 72 working business hours to get the recording up on our website. We do have the WIOA Summit this week that my team is facilitating, so please bear with us for this recording. We'll get it up on our website as soon as possible. I also want to launch our beginning polls that we do typically during our WIOA professional development sessions. Feel free to go ahead and answer those now. You should be able to scroll and answer both of them. They are open to you now, and we'll give everyone about 45 seconds to a minute to answer those polls. You can go to the next slide too. Give everyone a couple more seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So most of you are joining us from, actually we have a good broad spectrum across the state, which is awesome. And most of you are from Title I, a couple people from other WIOA partners and stakeholders, and a couple people from Title II as well. So thank you for attending today's session. I'm going to hand it off to Jim Potts, Christy Chevali, and Paula Berry to start us off.
Good morning, everyone. Jim Potts here with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Last week we had a little problem hearing, so could we get confirmation? Can everybody hear me okay?
You sound good to me on my end, Jim.
Good, excellent. So next slide, Paula, please. Today we're going to start out, it's just going to be a recap, a little bit of what we covered last week on the the third. When we got in more to the policies, both the federal as well as the state, and then we spoke about how important it is for locals to have their local policy. And as a state, we're going to have brand new updated follow-up policy that should be coming out in the real near future. So it's really important that local areas make sure to look at the new state updated policy and update yours accordingly. Today, we're going to illustrate recording follow-up services within IWDS. And as mentioned, Christy Chevali with LWIA 7, the partnership, she's going to be on and she's going to speak about recording follow-up services within Career Connect. And at the end, we're going to speak about demonstrating how Illinois Performance Accountability System, the IPATS, should be used along with everything performance, but also as well with follow-up. So next slide, Paula. As I mentioned, we got the state policy and it's chapter 4, section 3, and then there's, that's for all of it. And then there's a 3.1 for adult dislocated worker, 3.2 for the youth. And then some other ones, other state commerce policies. You have the chapter 3, section 3.3, which is co-enrollment and exit. And then the career planning policy that was just updated in March of 2023. It had originally came out back in December of 2021, but there's a new version. So you want to make sure you have the most current, which came out in March of 2023. Next slide, please. Again, reminder, adults dislocated worker participants, they must provide follow-up services for up to 12 months after the first date of employment for participants who obtain unsubsidized employment. This is right in the federal legislation. Some of the things follow-up may be available to other participants who do not obtain unsubsidized employment. For youth participants, follow-up must be made available for a minimum of 12 months from the program exit. And then again, follow-up services at a minimum, and this is in our state policy, that at a minimum should occur at least every 30 days for the first 3 months, and then must occur at least once a quarter for the remainder of the 12-month period. And this aligns with quarterly post-exit reporting requirements. It's also a way to, the evaluation should be conducted to determine the appropriate follow-up services a participant requires to be successful. And one of the things I do want to touch back on that last slide where it talked about once a month for the first 3 months, as well as once a quarter, that's the state policy. If your local policy is more restrictive, like I'm aware of one of our LWIAs that has a local policy that states you must follow up once a month for all 12 months. Well, then you're held accountable at your LWIA to follow your local policy. So it's really important to know what your local policy says. Now, the local policy cannot override the state guidance. It can't eliminate once a month for the first 3 months and then once a quarter after, but it could be more restrictive. So again, it's really important to understand what your local policy says. Now we're ready for the next slide. Some general details about follow-up. In IWDS, the service of follow-up is opened up with a start date, but all the actual activities are actually recorded through the case notes as well as on the exit control panel. One of the things to understand that if a client has obtained full-time self-sustaining employment or unsubsidized employment while he or she is still receiving WIOA services, it's not possible to open up that service of follow-up. So at that time, you would still just record it through the normal two-way communication, but in your case note, you'd want to make it really clear that you're beginning that follow-up due to the client meeting unsubsidized employment. And we'll have some screens later on to explain this type of information. And again, follow-up is really important on your exit control panel, especially for those jobs that do not report wages through the Illinois Department of Employment Security through IWDS. Those have to be reported through what's called supplemental wages. And at the end, towards the latter part of this presentation, we'll demonstrate how to record those supplemental wages within IWDS. And then also for youth, post-secondary education, which is a performance outcome equivalent to somebody being employed, is updated on the exit control panel accordingly also. Next slide, please. Again, for an adult dislocated worker, when all WIOA services have been completed, then the activity of follow-up should be opened. All two-way communication complete as part of follow-up would be recorded under the case note feature within IWDS and or on the exit control panel like I just spoke about. And again, it's really important for the outcomes that exit control panel is updated. Now, there are requirements, or excuse me, a direction within the state policy that speaks about after 90 days following exit, if a participant is not responsive, they cannot be located, or they refuse to provide information, the career planner may close the follow-up. And when you're doing that, then you make sure you have a good case note trail, and there actually should be that. If you've been trying to contact the individual during follow-up at least once a month for the first 3 months, and you're having a hard time getting a hold of them or they're not responsive, you should see that case note trail. But again, you want to make sure if after 90 days they're not responsive, it's fine to close follow-up and just have that good case notes. Now, you would not want to update the IEP about that. And the reason why is because the IEP for an adult and dislocated worker, it's an enrolling service. So if you'd go in and update the IEP just to say can't reach the client, I'm closing the follow-up, well, that would add in another enrolling service. So you don't want to do that for your adult dislocated worker. You want to make sure you're just updating in the case notes. Next slide, please. Some of the things we can do in follow-up, and we touched on all of these last week. And for those of you who are participating now that did not get a chance to participate in the webinar last Wednesday, the 3rd, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to that recording, because it speaks a lot about the requirements. So we're not going to get into a ton of details about these things you can do in follow-up, because we did that last week. But one of the things I did want to pass on to make sure we're clear on, for an adult and dislocated worker, supporting services cannot be associated with follow-up services for an adult or dislocated worker participant. See, supporting services could be allowed for a youth, and we'll speak about that in a moment in the presentation. But for an adult and dislocated worker who's in follow-up, you cannot provide supportive services. However, if you remember me speaking earlier about if a client obtains unsubsidized employment and they're still enrolled in WIOA enrolling services, meaning, like an example, maybe the client's still in training after they have obtained their job, it's fine to still provide supporting services at that point, because the client, as long as it's associated with the enrolling service, as an example, if the client's getting transportation or childcare while he or she's in training, that they've obtained unsubsidized employment, it's still fine to, even though you've started the follow-up due to them obtaining unsubsidized employment, it's still fine for you to provide that transportation or childcare while they're still in the training. So I want to make sure it's clear on that. So next slide. Again, for the youth, we touched on a moment ago, follow-up must be made available for youth for a minimum of 12 months. The follow-up could be provided longer if it's allowed per your local policy. Follow-up should be reported on the day they begin, which would align with the date of the youth program exit. Activities and services provided during the duration of follow-up must be documented in your standard case notes. And then there's a report within IWDS. It's called WIOA Youth Exiters Without Follow-Up. You want to make sure that you guys are running that report on a regular basis, so we don't miss a client who has been exited that's a youth that is not in follow-up. And one of the things about the youth, we spoke about how we don't want to update the IEP for an adult or dislocated worker because that's an enrolling service. Well, for youth, that the individual service strategy, the ISS, it's not considered an enrolling service. So when things come up for a youth, it's all right to go into that ISS and record updates to that on a youth, even during follow-up. And there's instances when you must do that, which we'll speak about in a moment. And that's typically if you're going to put the youth in supportive services while he or she is in follow-up. But again, we'll touch on that in a moment. Next slide, please. Some of the things that, again, we touched on this a lot last week on the 3rd, the things you can do with a youth during follow-up is supportive services. If the funding is available and the need for supportive services are supported by the ISS, adult mentoring, financial literacy, services that provide labor market information, employment information, activities that help the youth prepare for transition to post-secondary and training, and then other services necessary to ensure the success of the youth in employment and or post-secondary education. So that's just a list of things that you could do. And again, you can do other things as well during youth follow-up. So next slide. As mentioned on that previous slide, if any of those youth activities that are part of actually enrolling services are provided during follow-up, it's important to update the ISS with details on why those were needed. The actions, informations are recorded under the case notes describing what was provided. No actual service element would be recorded. It is not considered an enrolling youth activity and does not extend the exit of the client. Again, it does not reset or extend participation for 12 months of follow-up. So let's say you have a youth that he or she is attending post-secondary education and their car breaks down, and you're wanting to, it's allowable in your supportive services policy to provide transportation while somebody is in follow-up for when something happens, and maybe you guys are going to provide a temporary bus pass for the person to go to and from. Well, you'd want to make sure to update the ISS to explain car broke down, we're providing temporary transportation, and you just record that under the case notes, the actions of it. Next slide, please. And as I touched on again, it must be recorded through the case notes. And that's both in IWDS as well as in Career Connect. One of the things about Career Connect, for those of you who work with LWIA 7 that use Career Connect, just want to make sure everybody understands that when you record things in Career Connect, it actually feeds into Illinois Workforce Development System, IWDS. IWDS is the system of record for federal reporting for the state of Illinois. So everything that goes into Career Connect, including the case notes and all your services, they get fed into the IWDS system. So either one, whether it's IWDS or Career Connect, make sure you're doing good case notes. And one of the things we have within the state, this policy, it's called data lag policy. And what it states is that within 10 days of something occurring, the case notes or the services must be recorded. So it's important to keep on top of your case notes and things like that, but you do have that data lag of up to 10 days. The services screen will list all services provided so that anybody can look at it to see what's went on with the client. And again, you want to keep it up to date with a maximum of only 10 days behind of when you're not closing something or opening something, because you need to keep on top of that. And then again, case notes, adding additional episodes of case notes. It's really important that you're tying things together. Don't just put little blurbs. Make sure it's clear. Use that note subject line if there's something going on. So when somebody is having something occur, they can look or view in case notes. They could look through the subjects and have an idea of what you're talking about. Maybe it's going to deal with the circumstance they want to review. So utilize that subject line a lot. Next slide, please. Again, I touched on it earlier, but for any adult or dislocated worker who obtains unsubsidized employment while they're in WIOA services, that's when you would start the follow-up. But again, if they're receiving other enrolling services, you can't physically open that service of follow-up. You'd have to record it during your normal two-way communications. And it makes sense if you have a client and let's say he or she gets a job and they're still enrolled in WIOA services, maybe a training service. And each time you talk to them, you should be asking, hey, what's going on with the job? Any issues? How's things going? And just keep that and make sure you're recording it, because that's doing that follow-up. We got a next slide is a demonstration of a mock example out of our training database that I put together. So go ahead and here's a case note. As I mentioned, make sure your note subject's clear. Began unsubsidized employment at Computer Bank. Harold successfully completed an OJT with Computer Bank on Friday, 4/28, and then he was hired full-time, making $24 an hour, working 40 hours a week. And then it just goes on to speak about part of getting that job as he had to complete a self-paced management training that he was enrolled in at the local community college. It speaks about when that's going to be expected to meet, and it talked about the hiring date. So again, make sure your case notes stand out and let somebody know that you're beginning the follow-up. This is one of the things that our local monitoring staff with Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, Tamika Chisholm and her team, this is one of the items that when I'd asked the issues that they were seeing around follow-up for findings on monitoring was that when people obtained unsubsidized employment, it wasn't clear that follow-up was starting. So again, making a good case note, if you can't open that service of follow-up, and even if you can open the service of follow-up, make sure your case notes are good and descriptive. Next slide, please. So we're switching example clients. So this, or excuse me, not switching, showing the last client. The services screen that shows the client still has training open, but again, as we had demonstrated on that previous slide, we began follow-up due to that individual obtaining unsubsidized employment. So next slide. The interaction again between the participant and the career planner, as well as all related actions that are part of follow-up, are recorded in the case notes and when appropriate within the IWDS exit control panel. Again, you're going to hear me reiterate this because it's really important. This is some issues that both the federal, when they did Department of Labor, when they did monitoring, as well as our local staff identified as issues with follow-up, and it wasn't clear what's occurring during follow-up. So it's really important that we're making sure to do good descriptive case notes. Next slide, please. So here's a client. They finished their services and their last day of service was on 3/11/22. It was an episode of career planning case management. Now, one of the things I also want to touch on that was brought up by the Department of Labor for monitoring is we've had instances that people were just reaching out to a client to find out if they're employed. And then they found out that the client was employed and they recorded that under career planning case management as a service. But it wasn't a service, and that's what the write-up was, that that people were recording services when it wasn't an actual service. So if you reach out to somebody just to find out if they're employed and they say, yeah, I got a job, and they gave you the details, well, you're not providing a service. That's just a traditional case note. You would not record that under services. So it's important to understand the difference between you're providing a service and when you have just general information that you record under case notes. But in this example, the last day this person had an actual service was on 3/11/2022 of career planning case management. So next slide. So on that same day, 3/11/2022, the actual service of follow-up was opened up in Illinois Workforce Development System. Next slide. And then for this example client, again, the 3/11/2022 was the actual date we've started the follow-up. The same date of the last enrolling service. You could do follow-up on the day after the last enrolling service. Either one's acceptable. And this is the same in both IWDS or Career Connect. You just want to make sure that you're opening up. So again, when the client obtains unsubsidized employment, and or when the last service is completed and no further services are planned, that's when we're going to open up follow-up. Next slide, please. So here's the services screen that shows the client has not been exited yet. They just have ended all enrolling services. No further services are planned. So we begin the follow-up with the client. Next slide. I'm going to switch over now to Christy Chevali with the partnership, and she's going to talk about Career Connect and these steps to follow. And again, to reiterate, Career Connect, it's going to feed the information that's recorded in Career Connect over into IWDS, the reporting system of record. So it's really important you follow the steps that Christy's going to speak about now.
Thank you, Jim. Hi, everyone. This is Christy, like Jim mentioned, from LWIA 7 or the partnership. So like Jim said, this is the state system of record. So everything you guys enter in Career Connect eventually makes its way over to IWDS. So thank you guys for letting us share some of our screenshots because some of our career coaches have never used IWDS. So this is the Career Connect services screen. And we're just going to kind of follow the same example that Jim gave. This customer, his last career planning service was entered on 1/27/03. And you can tell that because everything's closed and the actual end date is 1/27. And there's no other services planned. So now the follow-up should be open. Next slide, please. So for the example on the previous slide, the final WIOA service is recorded on 1/27. And just as Jim said, the follow-up will begin on 1/28, which is the day after, and that's as acceptable as the same day. So if you could go to the next slide, please. And if you notice on this screen, you see that green O. That means that follow-up service has been open and that there's no actual end date. If you see on the last column to the right, it says the word close. That means that the service is actually still open. And when you're ready to close it, you're going to click on that link to add the date. And again, as Jim mentioned, that these things that you're going to record for this service are in the case notes or the exit control panel in IWDS. And we'll show you some corresponding Career Connect slides later on in the presentation. Next slide.
All right, so we're going to switch back to IWDS, and hopefully we're not confusing some folks when we jump between the two systems, because it's really important we make sure we're inclusive. You know, most of the state, or excuse me, downstate uses IWDS, but the folks up in Chicago use Career Connect. But again, Career Connect feeds into IWDS. So during this presentation, Christy will come in and speak about the Career Connect, and then we'll go back to speaking about the IWDS, but the content is still the same. We're talking about making sure you're doing good detailed case notes, timely case notes, making sure that you're tying together the story. It's important regardless of which system you're using, to make sure that you're taking those actions. So the next slide is going to give you an example of that client where we just started the follow-up on the 11th of March of 2022. So you'll notice there's a note category that was, it's filled with a drop down, and there's a section there for post-exit follow-up. So that's for sure the category you'd want. And then the note subject, it's free-flowing text, meaning you could put whatever you want, but make sure it's good and descriptive. Like in this case, I put follow-up beginning. So there's no ambiguity of what we're doing here with this subject or with this client. And then we come in, Joe came in today and dropped off his most recent paycheck with Computer Bank. He has received a pay raise up to $30 per hour, and his hours went up from 42 hours per week, and just went on to be descriptive about it. And again, you want to be as descriptive as possible, so it tells a story for somebody who's going to review it. So next slide, please. As was discussed, youth follow-up services may include supportive services. Again, it's really important that you're reviewing your own local policies to make sure that you know what your local policies state, and if they allow or how they address the use of supportive services during follow-up. Supportive services during follow-up for a youth must assist their participant in achieving their stated employment and/or education goals or objectives as outlined in the ISS. In this next slide, it's going to demonstrate an example of a case note of a youth who is in follow-up where the local policy stated that they could provide supportive services. So in this case, the client was in follow-up and his car broke down. So based on the local policy for this LWIA, they were able to provide supportive services. So in this, it was a good descriptive case note. Car broke down while at LLCC, which is the local Lincoln Land Community College, request assistance. And then it went on to speak about how Jake is in follow-up for the youth program, taking post-secondary courses, and speaks about getting estimates for his repair for his car, and a good descriptive case note. You're not going to do anything on the services screen. You're just going to update the ISS for the client, the individual service strategy, to speak about allowing and doing this, and then the good descriptive case note are the two things that you would do. So next slide, please. One of the other allowable activities for a youth during follow-up is to receive financial literacy. Now, if you think about financial literacy, it could be used at different times. When somebody's in an enrolling service for financial literacy, it probably is going to be talking about something different. But maybe during follow-up, maybe this is the first time the youth has had a job and has substantial monies, has some income, and maybe they're just looking for some of your wisdom on some assistance with it. So here's an example of a case note for a youth who's in follow-up, and we're going to provide financial literacy. And again, it's the case note. Make sure your note subject's good and descriptive. Financial literacy during follow-up. In this case, the client had just had extra money and he was wanting to know some ways of maybe getting some better interest rate than getting 0.002 at his local bank. So I referred him to a bank so he could maybe look at certificates, deposits, and things like that. So again, it doesn't have to be anything huge, but if you think about it, you know, for a youth, you as a career planner are very influential in their life. You know, sometimes they may not have an adult that they feel like they can go to for guidance, or they trust you. So maybe they'll reach out to you, and this is allowable youth activity is to speak about financial literacy or make referrals to places. So just take credit for the work you're doing. And again, if the client was in services, in enrolling services, that would be an enrolling service. But during follow-up, you can provide it, and you're just going to case note the actions. It's not going to extend participation. It's not going to change anything. It's just an allowable activity during youth follow-up. Next slide, please. And now documenting the service of follow-up, again, besides that going into case notes each quarter, as I touched on earlier, it's important to go into those exit control panels and update accordingly. And again, it's really, really important for those people who do not report wages through Illinois Department of Employment Security. And this could be clients that maybe are self-employed, maybe somebody who is working for a farmer, maybe an au pair or a housekeeper. Typically a good way to know if a client is working at a job that does not report to Illinois Department of Employment Security is if you run an IWDS check, the wages will not be on there because they don't report through IWDS. So if somebody says they've been working at a job for an extended period of time and there's no wages in IWDS, more than likely that's supplemental employment, that the only way you can get credit for it is to record it through supplemental wages. And it's also for those youth who are entering post-secondary education training while they're in follow-up. If you're not recording it on the exit control panel, there's nobody else that's going to record it. And there is a positive outcome for those youth who are in post-secondary training education. And it's really important at that second and fourth quarter time frame that we update that. So those are some things that you want to make sure to stay on top of it. Next slide, please. What we're going to do now is we're going to transition to back to Christy, and she's going to speak about Career Connect and documenting follow-up. So go ahead, Christy.
Thank you, Jim. So those of you in LWIA 7, we just want to point out here that the several slides that Jim's going to cover, where he's going to talk about the exit control panel. We have you guys all know, you should know about the help desk. So everything that he's going to talk about is we have a procedure that matches what he's talking about on the help desk. And this is called the quarterly follow-up procedure. And if you see there's a link here, you can use that if you want to follow along or just see the corresponding screens. We did give you a few screenshots as reference to what Jim's going to be talking about, because whatever he's going to say when he says update quarter 1 or quarter 2, or like he was talking about updating the youth going to school, we're going to show you the equivalent screen in Career Connect that you need to update. So we have a procedure that walks you through all of that information that can be found on the help desk. And if you guys have any questions for LWIA 7, you know how to reach your regional manager, program coordinator, or you can always email the help desk. Next slide, please. So this is just a screenshot of what it looks like in Career Connect. So if you see there, it says the red circle and arrow says second quarter after exit. So when you want to update and transfer this information to the IWDS exit control panel, this is how you're going to do it. And like I said, we have a procedure that walks you through step by step for this. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Yes, and once you click on the link, this is going to be the screen that shows inside Career Connect. And the specific details can be found on our procedure. And again, the next slides that Jim's going to cover are going to show you. So these are the screens that you enter in Career Connect. What you enter here will end up in the next slides that Jim's going to talk about in IWDS. And then Jim, if I missed anything, you can throw it in.
No problem. Thanks, Christy.
Thank you.
One of the things we're going to do now is I'm going to transition from me presenting over to Paula Berry. Paula's works the performance unit, and she's in the know of everything performance related, including the post-exit wages, post-exit outcomes. So Paula's going to take over now, and I'm going to transition out. And so Paula, it's up for you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So yeah, I will finish our discussion on documenting outcomes when they occur in the system. So you get credit and everything that counts for performance. So to start out, like Jim mentioned, post-exit employment and education needs to be recorded within the exit control panel. It's the screen you use when you exit someone, but also there are modules and sections within it that capture all kinds of other information post-exit. So most important thing is for jobs, for your participants who get employment, that actually report their wages to its IDES, Illinois Department of Employment Security. That wage information will automatically upload into IWDS, and you'll see it on the exit control panel, and so you automatically get that employment outcome and the wage outcome. But for clients, participants, exiters who find employment at a job that does not report wages to IDES, otherwise known as supplemental, the first one I spoke of that does report to IDES, we usually refer to as unsubsidized employment. It's not necessarily always unsubsidized, but so the information about your supplemental employment who doesn't report to IDES has to be recorded in different screens and IWDS in order to get any type of performance credit for those wages. So that's what's so important about that. So this is an example of the exit control panel that you're used to seeing in IWDS when you exit someone and enter all types of data. Each quarter should record updates as appropriate and timely for each participant. So Jim has showed examples here. So you have exited this person, Joe Buck. It'll populate your exit date, their school status, the exit reason. And you can note here that since this career planner realized that Joe was exiting to supplemental employment, not reporting wages to IDES, we're not just going to automatically see him and get to count them. You'll know that it's important to follow him and continue to document his supplemental employment on this exit control screen. So as Jim pointed out here on the slide he created, there's a button in each section here that you can click to update it, and it just says update. So click the update button. So again, I think I just said this before I got to too soon before the slide, but most participants are in employment who does report to IDES. So we're going to get those wages, and you'll see them post-exit. You don't have to manually take the steps to enter that. But again, like Joe Buck, who got supplemental employment, and we're never going to get them. The only way we'll ever see their wages, employment, which is a performance outcome, is for you to follow up and make sure it's documented. So this is the same example for Joe Buck. And so when on the previous screenshot of that exit control panel, when you click on update, what we're wanting to do here is update his post-exit employment. And regardless of the employment module you go in, that little employment section on the screen, you're going to go through the same steps for data entry. So this example, we're going to update Joe's post-exit Q2 to get his supplemental wages recorded, because there's no other way we're going to find out about him. And we'll update all his other post-exit outcomes as well here using this module on this screen. So Joe's a participant who has exited with supplemental employment. at the time of exit. And then we find out in his post-exit Q2, he's got the same job. So that means it's still supplemental. We need to track those wages for our outcomes. So again, this is just demonstrating the fields that need to be populated. Here's his post-exit outcome. It's supplemental. So we know we need to follow up on him again. The employment verification date, you will be required to select a documentation source. So it's some type of written documentation we'll need. If this hasn't already been completed once for the employment, for the job, his computer bank supplemental employer, you will need to always document a yes or no if that job is related to their training, and the wages will eventually populate once you complete that field. And then you always have to hit save in order for it to transfer over to the exit screen and get those outcomes in the quarter. So again, that example was second quarter post-exit, but for every exited participant, their second and fourth quarter post-exit employment and wages are what is reported. So those are the two main quarters that count for being positives in our performance for employment. So if for some reason they continue on with the supplemental employer in their fourth quarter after exit and that employer is not reporting them to us, the only way, again, we will know about it is if you tell us. Wages do count. So in this example, Joe Buck actually got a raise from his supplemental employer. So that needs to be updated too by you in order to report the correct updated wages, since we won't just get the match and upload them like for most of the participants you see. So here is what Joe's exit control panel will look like after he's been exited. So we're going on 4 quarters post-exit. So we're reaching around a year mark for him. You'll want to make sure you update the fourth quarter post-exit as seen here with the red arrow. And since in this quarter, we realized that he can document a wage increase up to $32. And their hours increase too. So that calculation is going to could possibly be a big impact on his overall wages. So what the next slides are simply going to demonstrate how you would update this to make sure you tell the system that that participant is increasing their wages and even increasing their employment hours. So again, you would go to that module. I'll show you again. So once you hit the update button, it takes you immediately to a screen like this. And since you are updating it, you want to pick the job again. So you need to go into that actual job record. Pick job. You'll go into that computer bank job that you know that is Joe's current supplemental. So when you first recorded it, you had him working at $30 an hour and his wage went up to $32.50. And you know when you'll have to document when the pay increase was put into effect. And then you pick that job, that specific job, to get into that section where you can change the wage. And then you would save the details of that job. You click on details, and then you'll want to go in and then, sorry, I'm not as good as Jim is going through these very technical screens in IWDS. I'm just used to being in the system. So sorry, and put any questions if I'm not being clear on something in the chat, please, and someone can remind me to go back to that. So again, you've picked the job. So it knows you want this computer bank job to be recognized to get Joe's wages reported. But we need to update his wage there. So click details, because that's the detail of this job record. This edit job screen is what you're all aware of. So we need to actually get back in there and go to this wage field and update it to the $32.50. On top of that, you knew that his hours per week changed to 50. So you'd want to update that as well. That will be a calculation for performance. So this is all just really important. So you could update job duties too, if applicable. So after you've saved, you're getting ready to save it, you can see that all of this is updated. You have to make sure to save it. Otherwise, we have nothing that's telling that exit control panel or anything reporting to tell it to update Joe's wages. Okay, once again, the system puts you back to this Q4 post-exit screen. So this isn't the exit control panel. This is once you've gone into that Q4. This is all about Q4 information. That completes the update of the exit control panel. Since you already hit the Q4, everything's done. You've done as much as you can do as far as his employment. Then when you go back and look at that exit control panel, everything's updated. And like I mentioned, the calculation, you'll notice since you went into those job details for the Q4, it calculated his wages correctly based on the 3250 and the 52 hours. And the other thing that's pretty important to note here, or maybe as a reminder, if you already knew this, when you're in a job, their job listing where you go and pick the job, it had the computer bank and it might have had another bank job or some other job. We need to make sure that when you know the participant is no longer working at a job that's listed in their job history, we're never going to delete a job, ever. That's data that we need to keep forever. We need to put an end date on that employment though. Otherwise, our system could look at it as an open job record and calculate that old wage into these outcomes. So we don't want that. And it throws off other things for reporting. So the next time you're in there, if you notice the job is really old, it just doesn't even apply anymore, please go in and add an exit date. And if you're wondering which date to use, per Jim's guidance also, use the date of their WIOA application. If you're not sure, if they weren't with you when they got the job and you're just not sure, it's not reported, you won't be deemed if you know they're not employed, but you can't go back and dig through and find the exact date that old job ended that's appearing in the system. It's just a way to maintain their records. So at this point, you've updated everything on their exit control panel that's going on while you're providing them follow-up activities and capturing them. What you'll want to do one last time before you close follow-up is to make sure all the case notes are up to date and completely accurate. So this is like your one last chance to review and make sure that they're all added there and in sync with the follow-up and the close date. So in this case, you'll see that that last case note was intended to verify the details about the participant's pay raise and then detailed the Q4 follow-up. So you're case noting what you found out, and then you actually did the data entry on top of a case note to do that. So you verified all the case notes align, are accurate, it's all inclusive. You're happy with the level of detail you provided, but so then what you'll want to do is go back into the services screen. So this is after all of this follow-up, you won't be going into the services screen, but except you will need to end the follow-up. So the start date was March 11th of 22. And all you'll do, just like any other service, is click on the follow-up service label itself, add your end date. In this case, it's exactly 1 year after the start date. in most cases at this state, obviously based on all of the information you are able to get from this participant and find out and document about employment, it's a successful completion. And you'll save that record. Like I just said on the slide before, you'd use the status of successful completion with an end date, save it, and then your service screen is complete all the way through the end of the provision of their follow-up services. And now I'd like to hand it back over to Christy so she can fill you in on how this looks in Career Connect.
Thank you, Paula. So again, this is the services screen for Career Connect, and it kind of works the same way as any other service that you're entering. We want to go back and close the follow-up services as we stated. In order for you to do that in Career Connect, you still see this little green O, it means it's open, and you want to click on the word close. And that will bring you into another screen where you can actually add the date. So if you could go to the next screen, please. And here you're going to enter the last activity date. You're going to put what, it should be 1 year after follow-up. I think in my example, I couldn't do it with the whole year date because it was 2024, but the concept is the same. You're just going to add the last date of the follow-up service, when in this case, it should be 1/27/24. Again, as Paula mentioned, we know it's successful because the person completed, and then you're going to add your case note. Then once you're finished with those 3 things, you're going to click on finish. And if you could go to the next slide, thank you. And now if you go to the services screen, you notice that there's this yellow C and there's an actual date. There is an actual end date. So that means that the service is actually closed. And that's the next slide. Yep, that's it. Thank you.
Hey everyone, are you able to hear me? This is Mark.
Oh, could you not hear me?
No, okay, now we got you back, Paula. Yep, for some reason the audio wasn't working. We can hear you now.
Okay, could you hear me at the beginning of the iPad slide?
No, you'll have to start.
Okay, I'm so sorry. So anyway, we just want to do a recap at the end of all of this follow-up information on the Illinois Performance and Accountability and Transparency System, otherwise known as IPATS, and its utility as a WIOA performance tool. Why we're mentioning performance today is, maybe you got this or not, and I think I was muted, is that everything we're doing in follow-up, on top of making sure your participants continue on in their success, is capturing specific performance outcomes. Just like we mentioned, you serve them all along. When you exit them, what they're doing post-exit, that's their performance outcomes, especially as it's to employment. Youth need that education documented. That isn't going to be the automatic upload. If they didn't get their credential when they were working with you, all of that follow-up communication and engagement is going to get you performance outcomes to report. So anyway, this IPATS tool was kind of created to give a different picture of this. So instead of just running reports, maintenance reports and compliance reports out of IWDS, which are valuable, This just gives you a really good dashboard type picture of customer engagement and things. As we said, follow-up services will assist career planners in managing case files and capturing those extra post-exit outcomes. And it's critical to make sure we get all those positive outcomes document and get credit for everything you're doing. So the IPATS dashboard, the intention of it is to just provide a customer activity snapshot more effectively. It tracks career and training. You can export, you can see a count of numbers of participants as they move through their WIOA participation and after during exit. So counts of who you've gotten training, who's just in career. It has a tracker on case notes, 30 days without case notes, 60 days without case notes. So kind of an alert, it's color coded as well, as I'll show you in 1 second. It identifies program exit dates, and there's even a line that will give you a countdown of days leading up until you've passed that 90-day exit rule. All your people who you haven't served and it's been over 90 days, there's a line on the dashboard to let you see that. And bottom line is what it's trying to do is assure that we are capturing accurate WIOA performance outcomes to make sure we can see what we're doing and reporting all of those that are available. So regularly reviewing IPATS and using it would inform career planners of important dates and timelines on top of identifying when performance related information might be missing or not reported, or maybe you're on the cusp of becoming non-compliant with your case note data entry, service data entry, or not exiting people timely, which we all know that's been around forever. And based on how you're serving your participants, sometimes those things can fall through the cracks. This is like a safeguard on that. So here's just one quick example. This is in a section of IPATS that says customer activity. These counts, as you'll notice to the right in blue, those seem high. This is probably a statewide dashboard for, say, for example, our adult program. So you can see your customer activity or engagement. We've got over 2,700 people with no case notes in 30 days. Then you see this last active service greater than 60 days ago. So that's kind of creeping up to the 90 days. If any of you are aware, I'm sure you probably are, with the IWDS report and that long list that's called days since last active service, or customers nearing 120 days, that's what you would run to make sure you're getting people exited before it locks you out. So this is the counterpart of that. And it's right here, and it's simple because you kind of have a countdown. 60 days, getting kind of close. You might want to check into that for it. Last active service greater than 90. Okay, now there's a window of time where you as a career planner are going to be locked out, and you're going to have to ask me or Mark Burgess to exit them. Once you get greater than 110 days, that's pretty much when you're locked out and you have to request the state to review it for exit. These two last are very important too. The data in participants with open services for more than 6 months and participants with open services for more than 18 months, that can't be retrieved from IWDS. And why this is so important is that these participants with open services for more than 6 months, 2,982. In your areas, it was probably much smaller, but there could be instances where, since they're not going to fall into the no service report because they've got open services, what if one of those services, and it could be a career service that we never made same day, or a youth element that is not a same day. So the career planner had the option to leave it open. And you could make sense that if you see like a post-secondary prep transition service open for 9 months, that's never been closed and they've been in it for 9 or 10 or 11 months, and their application date was kind of far back, you might want to look at that to make sure they're still even doing it. Same for more than 18 months. That's usually geared for training. We assume some trainings go longer, so it's not really going to turn red necessarily, but you just always want to check on those. It's very important that you close a service or element that you do not have a participant participating in. Without these lines, those are almost impossible to catch without going through case notes. So anyway, I just want to point that out because we are going to start reviewing those. And then when you click on any of these blue counts for each line, it will take you to a detailed listing. You can customize that export. Oh, I'm sorry, it does show performance. You can customize each export by their application date, last contact date, exit date, if applicable. You can see their last 4 of their SSN and career planner. So every time you click a blue count, that export is completely customizable to you to track it down and narrow them down, and it's sortable. So Jim also included, I'm sorry, I didn't remember this. So there's a little performance section. So these are the performance training indicators, the MSG and the credentials. So we know that depending on the measure, if your participants are in a training service, they're going to count in these. So we have total participants with measurable skills gained recorded. They can have multiple in a PY. So if you see your number appearing to be a little high, that could be it. And then you have on the flip side, participants without measurable skills gained. That's who you want to look at, especially on a career planner, LWIA level. This is statewide again. You might recognize that you just know someone had an MSG. You just got to get it in there. The flip side of that might be your participants who have a credential, but they don't have a skill gain. So sometimes the thinking might be, and depending on what they've been doing, if they have a credential and they were in some type of training, they should probably be getting skill gains alongside of that credential. And that's another different MSG training, but I just want to make you familiar with the dashboard. So the 30 days left to earn a measurable skills gain, what this is going to show you is that, and not necessarily during follow-up, during participation, as the clock goes ticking down towards July, you'll want to check this out because it will show you your participants who had a training service and are in the MSG who still don't have one. And you can export that count and look at them. This will really only apply when you get into June, and it will start counting down possible missing MSGs for you. So with that all set on the dashboard, I will wrap it up for today. And if you ever have any questions or comments, we have a WIOA Title IB Performance FAQ page for the service matrix. And this is just some general instructions on how to use that. If you would, we would like general and brief questions that are applicable to all 22 LWIAs, and they should never contain anything like a participant name, addresses, or any other personally identifiable information, PII. So when you submit your question, you'll receive an email with a response from the general information account from Illinois WorkNet. So like it won't come from me or Mark when you're going through the FAQ. And then the responses will end up being posted on the FAQ page too. So, and the subject, and Mark Burgess, correct me if I'm wrong, right now it's just for services matrix. So I just talked about a lot of performance, I know. Sorry about that, but it's important for follow-up and for you to go back and check yourself through iPads. So, and then again, here are 3 of our contact information. If you have any questions, Laura Dahm will handle WIOA policy questions. Besides the FAQ, I usually take the performance questions, and then Jim Potts, as you know, is always answering questions on your IWDS systems concerns or issues. So thank you very much. I don't see anything in the chat. If I'm missing something, I can open that up.
Oh, we've got quite a few, Paula.
Oh, you do? Okay, there it is.
I'll manage these.
Great.
And some of these, Christy, if you're still here, a couple of them are specific to Career Connect. I'll start with those.
Okay.
So you can respond to those. So the first one in the chat was by Rosal. Sorry if I got the first name wrong. In a situation where a youth provides a pay stub during Q2 and Q4 during follow-up, and the information is entered in Career Connect, but is not showing up in IWDS, what do you want them to do?
We want you to contact your regional manager with that information, so then we can obviously work with you guys to we would do our troubleshooting on our end. So please let your program coordinator, regional manager know of that situation. We'll troubleshoot on our end, and then if it needs to be elevated, we'll follow up with you, I guess Paula or Mark, to find out what's going on.
Okay, great. And I'm going to go through the ones I wasn't able to respond, and if we have time, we can go back to some of the other ones I did respond to. So to clarify, are we able to open a follow-up service before exiting a client in Career Connect? This is kind of a three-part, so I'll let you answer that. Oh, wait, I guess it's or can we only open a follow-up service once the client has been exited? And again, I'm not familiar with your system there.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, Career Connect works the same way as IWDS, so it is correct that you cannot open up the follow-up service until the person's exited. That's why we were recommending, like as Jim had said, and other people from the state have said, that enter your case note that says follow-up is beginning as of this day. And then when the person's exited, you enter the follow-up services as of the day they exited or the day after they exited.
Okay, great. And I had responded to a similar question in chat on the IWDS side. So I'm glad to hear that at least it's consistent. And hopefully in the future, as we are continuing to revise, update our system of record, we can correct that. And it doesn't have to be done in that kind of roundabout way. How should we record employment advancement in Career Connect? For example, a client was first employed as a packer at Garrett's Popcorn, received a promotion to the role of driver upon getting a CDL. How do we record the wage increase and new job title?
That would kind of be similar to what Paula showed on the exit control panel. You would just have to update it in that quarter, you know, the appropriate quarter in Career Connect. We have the follow-up bar, and whatever quarter that happened, you would just click on the blue link there to update that quarter, enter the information, save it, and then again, case note it.
Okay, great.
Did that answer the question? I hope.
Whoever that was sent in the chat, not the chat, it was sent in the Q&A section and by anonymous. So if someone still needs more clarification, drop another message in the chat or Q&A and we'll respond to it. And this one I'm not familiar with, Paula. If the job is in all caps with no other information, do we need to add the missing information? Is all caps an indication? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
The ones you see in all caps are the ones that have been pulled over from IDES. So sometimes you'll see a duplicate. It looks like a duplicate, one that you've entered. Maybe you realized they were working somewhere before it came over from IDES. So it's like the identical job. One is a record we pulled over and one you manually entered getting ahead of the game on their job record. So if you have that job updated with their wages, hours, everything from what you know to be true and can document, yes, make sure that the job record, if the all caps job is the only one and you know that that's their job, make sure any wages are updated in there if you have that available to you. Otherwise, maybe you won't know the wages ahead of the upload, but when they come over and you see them in all caps, we're eventually going to get them in the quarterly wage upload, if that's what you're asking.
So should they, maybe I didn't hear it, should they, if it looks like there's duplicates because they entered it and then it came over from IDS, should they delete one of those? So it's not counted twice, or how's that work?
No, and I have to check on this. I don't think you can.
Oh, okay.
So maintain the job record that you have manually entered yourself, and just know that you should be confident. I think I was reading the other question from Maureen. You should be confident that the wages will also populate, but they will just only populate on the exit control panel.
Okay, great. Another one, when closing and follow-up, you need to do the employment first. Is that correct? Meaning you can't go back in to add the last employment information after program exit.
If you're talking about the job record, you should be able to. If you're talking about that module on the exit control panel, depending on the timing and the exit date of the quarter, you should be able to keep updating that after you exit them. I mean, that's the point. All those modules post-exit happen after exit. And if you're asking if for some reason you close their follow-up service, like on that last screen I showed, so say you go in, and you look at their services screen and the follow-up service is closed, I could test this, and maybe Jim knows, but from my experience, it would not lock you out of updating this. Because a follow-up could be closed for some other reason during their third quarter. If you should keep them engaged. But if you find out something, you should always be able to update these post-exit quarters on those screens, regardless of a follow-up closure date. I can test that on a test customer, but if that's what you're asking, try to get it in, obviously real time, but sometimes when you learn of something, learning of an outcome might fall after the 10-day data entry requirement, but we still want you to put it in no matter what.
Okay, and a little bit of follow-up to that from Maureen. Are we exiting in unsubsidized employment and or supplemental, or all in unsubsidized and then supplemental info per quarter?
Okay, so.
And that's up, if you want to reread the question there, Paul, it's up at 155 is the time if you're scrolling through the chat.
Yeah, so if a job listed items is, are we confident? Yes, you should be confident. So if it's the exit reason is unsubsidized employment. So if you know the employer is reporting wages to IWDS, which is going to be the majority of employers, there aren't a ton. An example would be like if they started their own business, or they're working for someone, certain types of employers, like the Arsenal was only ever not reported to IWDS. So if like the LWIA 13, I think if you had a bunch of people going to the Arsenal, you had to put those as supplemental. So things like that are that we only know by your entry. So are we exiting and unsubsidized? Always use unsubsidized when you know they're employed to exit and it's someone who reports wages. Use supplemental if you know their employer isn't going to be reporting wages. So the only way for performance will get them is for your follow-up. Yeah, you wouldn't, and I see what you're saying, Maureen, I think, because what I see programs do is you know that your person is in full-time employment, for example, with an employer. Maybe it's a bank that is definitely reporting to IWDS. You know eventually we'll get their wage match, but career planners like it in the system quicker than we get it. So they go ahead and manually record an unsubsidized employer just like you would be required for the supplemental. So that does happen, and it's just a practice suggested in different areas, whether or not you do that. But 100%, you always must do that for supplemental. Unsubsidized, it's just if you want that job documented before we get the match. Maureen, if that's what you're asking. But I wouldn't say yes or no. I would say do based on what the LWIA or agency is advising you do as far as documenting job records.
Okay. So I want to jump to another one. I think we've got time for more after that, but I want to get to one of these. And first, to Crystal comment about these being great information and answers. We appreciate that. We will take these, and I'm not going to say we're able to post all of these to that FAQ page, but we'll certainly try to do that and update that page in the next week or so. Otherwise, we'll figure out a way to share some of this information if it's not on that page. And the one I want to take here real quick is a 1A, 1D, but I think I'm going to expand it to apply to youth as well. So for 1A, 1D is a question: do all customers need to be enrolled in follow-up after services? Can they decline right off the bat, or do they all need 3 months of follow-up before they can decline? And then if they decline follow-up, does the service still get open? Okay, I'll let Paul at the end answer that last one, but just keep in mind, follow-up is a very important, if you remember some of Jim's information last week, and even again, kind of repeated today, earlier, it's very important to ensure your customers, your participants, I should say, are receiving those follow-up services, especially for some of those who maybe haven't worked for a period of time, are just starting out a new career in a new job because they were dislocated. Those youth we know are the most difficult, and we mentioned that was mentioned last week, how DOL provided some statistics on not providing follow-up for youth and some of the outcomes thereof. So the first thing to think about is, upon entering the program, when you start going over all the services that are going to be received, that are going to be available, I should say, and you start determining what's to be received by that participant to help them reach their goals and objectives, follow-up needs to be in that conversation immediately so that they know you're going to be there at the end, because that's going to help you conduct follow-up. So you won't get so many declining individuals, because sometimes they get their job, and if they weren't made aware of follow-up or clear on what follow-up is, the importance of it, how it can help them once they get their job or continue on in additional education, they might just ignore your call, might not respond to it, what have you. But if they know the importance and how it's going to continue their plan and continue their success and your program success, they are going to be more likely to say, yeah, I certainly do want to keep connected with you. I want to hear what else is available. I want to make sure this is the right job, that I can succeed in this job, whatever it is. So, before even respond to this question, the first thing to remember is this should be something that begins at the beginning, even though follow-up occurs near the end, and so in that, you should be offering follow-up for 1A and 1D immediately upon indication they've got unsubsidized employment. That's what the policy says. That's what DOL guidance says. So from the date they're in unsubsidized employment, that follow-up should start. Not over 3 months. It really should be as quickly as you possibly can, because again, you don't want to lose that individual. If you wait 3 months to contact them because you have 3 months, it could be likely that they're not going to respond to you. In fact, Jim's guidance says in those first 3 months, you should be contacting them at least once every month. So remember that as well. So it shouldn't be a three month period you're thinking about, and really not even a 1 month. It's upon knowing that they're in employment for those 1A, 1D, and for the youth, it's the same thing. Once they're exited, which is what initiates follow up for them, you should get in contact with them as a career planner and start talking about follow up services, getting an understanding now that they're either employed or continuing education, what's next for them and what you can provide them in those follow up period of time, and what services would seem appropriate. given all that, if they do decline, there's not really a set time where you have to continue to call them and contact them. And, if they decline when you first contact them, I would look towards your local policy. I would look towards your local guidance, say, you know what, if they decline immediately, maybe they feel like, hey, they've got their job, they've completed their journey. It might behoove you to still contact them later and go, hey, just checking in. Is it everything you expected? Are you doing well? Do you have any concerns? Maybe check with the employer to say, hey, how are they doing? They're telling me they're doing great. Do you believe that? Or maybe they're telling me they're struggling. Can you help me understand that? Is there anything we can do as a program to continue serving them and helping them succeed with you in that employment? So a lot of things I just mentioned there, but there's a lot of reasons why it's kind of not a one and done, that once you contact them, right after exit or right after employment, that if they say, I'm really not interested, that you want to just say, okay, we're going to close this out. They told us they're not interested. Obviously, I mentioned don't harass them. Don't, overly, we all love, sarcastically, all those text messages and phone calls we get from anonymous sources. So we don't want to be one of those. But again, this is all on success of the program. And I think it only helps the program to try and maintain that connection and provide services they need. And so, Paula, if you might be able to help, if they decline, do you still open up follow-up service and indicate that? How do you indicate that they've declined?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, so I want to follow up on this from the chat, Mark, when we get our copy for DeMar specific, because
okay.
I think that there was some other guidance for youth that was very MIS specific, because there's other systems being used, like for the YCP and then in Illinois WorkNet. But I think that you open it and close it as unsuccessful unless they decline immediately. But let me get back to make sure we're 100% clear on that. Sorry, DeMar, or I think DeMar asked that. Yeah, so I'd like to follow up on that.
Okay, and we'll clarify,
That's
why it takes us a period of time to get the FAQ updated, even after we've held these webinars, because we go back and we review our responses, and we want to make sure we're giving you the most accurate information. And sometimes we catch ourselves after we've responded and maybe, need to revise some of the language, especially we're typing some of these in, and there's a better way to present it to be more clear in a response to your question. Sometimes we revise your question a little to be more general in nature, in the sense of applying to 22 LWIAs instead of something more specific. Now, if it's a Career Connect specific, we're not going to change that. But I mentioned the one earlier where it was Career Connect question, but it applied to IWDS as well. So, we do go back and review these and then update those, upload them to the FAQ page. So we'll certainly do that as well, and if we need to make some corrections. So our recommendation, people have asked us, how often they should go to the FAQ. First I bookmark it or favorite it, whatever browser you use and whatever that's called, and go to that once a week and see if it's updated. At the very top of the FAQ page, you'll see the most recent update. So if you kind of keep in your mind that, hey, last time this was updated was April 23rd, and you were there since then there's probably not anything else for you to go over again, unless you're just kind of reminding yourself of some responses. But if you see an updated date, then unfortunately we don't really have a way. Maybe we can talk to our folks over at SIU that work with us on that page. Maybe we can come up with some idea, whether it be italics or bold or something that identifies the ones that are uploaded new. One thing I will say is there at the end, there's no like order to the questions, other than the most recent ones are at the bottom of each of those subcategories. So you can kind of start there and see if you recall, if you go into the supportive services section and you go to the bottom and you say, oh, I've already read this, then nothing was updated in that section. We don't jumble them around for any particular reason, at least not at this time. So hopefully that helps you there. Got one last question I think that we haven't addressed for you, Christy, if you're still there. For Career Connect, I was always under the impression that customers should be exited before they reach 90 days as we don't want customers going more than 90 days without a service. As someone who is not a manager, I don't have access to enter services more than 90 days in the past. If I exit a customer and need to enter the follow-up service 90 days in the past, I won't be able to do that. Would a manager then need to enter the follow-up service?
Okay, for that question, yes, I'm glad that you're following the rules that, service is provided once every 90 days. But yes, if you have to enter the follow-up service and it's over 90 days, your site director should be able to do that.
Okay, and Paula showed you our iPad screen. That's not an issue with IWDS, that it's that strict right after the 90 days. But we have received clarification. Jim talked about one clarification earlier about supportive services on slide number 10, if you want to go back and review that. But the other one is really that you shouldn't assume no services are going to be received in that 90-day period. So, DOL continues to instruct us that someone should not be exited until the 90-day period is revised. We're going to revisit that with DOL because I know some of our guidance might have been either unclear or might even conflict with me stating that, where if there's no services planned and there's no gap in service, and let's say it's 60 days after the last service, we may have instructed you, or you may have the understanding that you could exit them at that point back to that last service date. And most recent guidance from DOL is kind of saying you should wait the 90 days because you just don't know that they're not going to need another service. As much as you might plan, all the plans can change, so we'll clarify that for everyone, and that's even brings in the more importance about iPads and keeping an eye on these things every 30, 60, and 90 days, is because if that's the guidance that we're going to have to go with, and that you actually have to let that 90-day period elapse without a service before you can go back and exit them on the last date of service, active service or training, whatever it is. You're going to need to manage that from a career planning standpoint. So again, we'll clarify that and make sure that you can't. But remember, for 1A, 1D, you can start follow up in that period, and for youth, you cannot start follow up until that exit occurs. So big distinction there between the three programs. I think we've hit all of the questions. I apologize if I did overlook something. Some of those that are in the Q&A section, we will still look at those again and respond to those in our FAQ, even though we did not respond to them directly in writing as a response to your question. So again, I hope we've responded to all of your questions in chat and Q&A, and look forward to uploading some additional information in the FAQ page for everyone. Paula?
Okay, thanks, Mark. So I think with that said, I lost my chat. If there aren't any further questions, we'll get back to you on the proper documentation of adding a follow-up tomorrow. I think that was you. If they immediately decline, or if you must keep trying. And I just put one quick clarification, because I read as I was reading through, for 1A, 1D, IWDS will let you add a follow-up. Like if you find out they get employed and start your follow-up and haven't put the exit in the system, you can open a follow-up. But if you find out they started an employment date and you have an open career or training service, because maybe they're started their job while they're still in their training, which happens, you won't be able to open that specific follow-up line. Just make sure you make it real clear in case notes that you're doing that, but you can't open follow-up because they have an open active service. So for youth, it's different though. So I just wanted to make sure that was straight.
Okay, and then for directors, managers, maybe even supervisors, I just posted in the chat that our next quarterly performance office hours is next Wednesday, not tomorrow, but a week from tomorrow. And in those, we kind of cover three things. We provide any updates in policy, or notices that come out of our policy unit, any guidance maybe from DOL that's new. So we have a new, new updates or new information. Then we have a second section, which is updates. So we clarify some information. So we might address some of these clarifications in that if we feel it's appropriate once we start putting the agenda together. Update some things. Next week, we're probably going to talk a little bit about performance outcomes in addition to some of these follow-up maybe questions. And then we also look for best practices as a third leg of these meetings. And so, if someone has a best practice they'd like to share with them, be available to let us know, and we'll open up your phone line and let you speak to it a little bit. Drop an email to Paula and I first, just so we know that you might have an interest of doing that. And we also share some best practices we've heard from all of you if maybe an LWIA doesn't want to share directly. So I like to share that as it's coming up, so all of you can put that on your calendar if you feel like it's something worth listening in on. And every quarter thereafter, we'll continue to hold those and continue to keep all of you updated on the things. And then finally, WIOA Summit on Thursday and Friday. Hopefully all of you have registered. If your intention is to attend, if not, let me know and we'll get you a link to that. I think that's all I've got. Paula, are you complete as well?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yep. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye.